Hello and welcome to day 10 of the 30-day Business English Challenge. If you have been watching from the beginning, thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm going to jump right into it today. And whether you're going to join us live or you're watching on the replay, I encourage you to join in. Put your answers in the comments. I will come back and check all of the comments. But let's get started. So today, day 10 is about business English idioms related to starting over. And just a reminder that business English idioms are used frequently with spoken English, but not in written form. And today we're looking at back to square one, back to the drawing board, go back to basics, wipe the slate clean, and turn the page. Those first three are incredibly similar, almost the same, but I think it's worth going through each of them. We're going to start by looking at the idioms in context, and I'll ask you to think about, can you get a feel for the idioms? Then at the end, when we've gone through them, we'll go back over this extract and look at it again. Okay, here we go. Jessica had been unhappy at work for a while and was ready to wipe the slate clean and find a new job. For a long time, she had been eagerly researching, trying to understand her options. However, when her first application to a job was rejected, she felt like she was back to square one. I need to reassess my approach, she thought. So she went back to the drawing board by revamping her resume. Okay, if you revamp something, you redo it to make it more fancy and more functional. So she went back to the drawing board by redoing or revamping her resume and cover letter. She focused on getting back to basics by putting all her attention on ensuring her application really highlighted her skills and experience. Her new application garnered an invitation. If you garner, it means you create an opportunity, you gain. So her new application gained or garnered an invitation to interview. Jessica was elated. That means she was really happy, very, very happy. Jessica was elated and felt she was finally about to turn the page on her bad luck. Okay, so this is an extract that deals with someone who is trying to find a new job and was thought they'd done a lot of research and thought they would be successful, but had their first application rejected, and they had to go back to the drawing board and try again to make their resume and cover letter much, much better. I have a lovely comment here. I'm just going to say hello, welcome. Faribors, I hope I'm saying that correctly, from west side of Vancouver. Oh my goodness, I lived in Vancouver for many, many years, 15 years actually. It's absolutely a gorgeous city. I miss Vancouver a lot. I hope you are enjoying living in Vancouver. Okay, moving on before I get stuck reminiscing about how absolutely gorgeous Vancouver is and how lovely Canada is in general. We are going to start by looking at back to square one. I'll read two example sentences and then we'll talk about what it means. Okay, after realizing the design flaws in the project, they had to go back to square one and rethink their strategy. Okay, so design flaws. There's something fundamentally wrong with the way that the product is working. There's something in the design that is a negative that's making it not work properly. And they have to go right back to square one to rethink their strategy as to how they put the product together. Okay, the second one. I hope this works. Otherwise, we are back to square one. Okay, so what do you think back to square one means? Or have you even heard that before? Have a think. If you had to think of a synonym, what would you say back to square one means? Well, it means to start over from the beginning. So yes, there we go. Comment coming in. There's a bit of delay. I didn't realize that, but you got it. Absolutely. Go back to the beginning. So you've made progress, but then something's gone wrong and you have to go right back to where you were when you first started. So to start over, begin again, reset. So we can go back to square one on something. Like, oh my goodness, we have to go back to square one on this project, or we can go back to square one with something. Those are the common collocations. Okay, here's a prompt for you. Describe a time you had to go back to square one. Um, so you can use that sentence stem if that's useful. I had to go back to square one when. So this happened to me when I was learning maths, for example. Um, when I was getting more up through the senior levels, I got to, a fairly high level of maths at school, and there were fundamental aspects of my learning that I hadn't mastered, and I couldn't make any progress. I kind of hit a ceiling, and I actually was very fortunate that my family were able to get a tutor to help me, and I went right back to square one, like back to the absolute simplest things that I needed to master, even like times tables. I went back to square one to like learn the times tables and learn like simple addition and very simple things so that I could move forward with the higher level things. That's an example from me. Um, Yay, we have an example. I had to go back to square one when my consideration is fairly hard to apply. Absolutely, when you cannot when you cannot figure out how to think through something when you were considering something. Um, Absolutely. So I had to go back to square one when I couldn't think it through, when I couldn't consider what to do. Absolutely. Well done. Thank you for joining in. I always appreciate when people do. I'm not going to pull up every comment because I don't want to put you on the spot. But I really appreciate the comments and everyone joining in. So thank you. Thank you. Okay, moving on to back to the drawing board, which is very similar, almost the same even. Okay, the marketing campaign didn't generate the expected results. So we'll have a meeting and go back to the drawing board. And the second one, after the prototype failed, so remember, a prototype is the first version of a product that's produced for people to experiment with. After the prototype failed, the engineers had to go back to the drawing board to come up with a new design. So this is, like I said, almost the same as back to square one, but there's a slight different, there's a nuanced difference to it. So a nuanced difference means like a very small difference. Um, So absolutely, yes. Thank you in the comments. It is like back to where we started, but it is in the sense of we need to go start again with a new plan after the failure of an earlier attempt, but it's used more for creative ideas or strategy, while back to square one is more for steps that need to be repeated. So if you think about my example with back to square one, I had to go back to square one and relearn my times tables and the steps that were needed to understand basic arithmetic and basic maths things. And I had to go through all those steps again. Step one, learn the times table. Step two, learn how to multiply. I had to go through those steps so that I understood them better. So that is really back to square one. But back to the drawing board is more, oh my gosh, our creative idea didn't work. So we created a new car, for example, but the steering system doesn't work. So let's go back and let's think about ideas for creating the steering wheel to work better. Let's go back and have some creative ideas. So we're going back to a stage where we're generating ideas, and those ideas will be completely new. Instead of back to square one is more, we're going back to the same steps and doing them again so we can do it better. Okay, so back to the drawing board, start anew, redesign, rethink. It's about rethinking something. Question for you. Do you have a go-to person when you have to go back to the drawing board? Okay, there's a informal but useful phrase. A go-to person is someone who is a trusted mentor or trusted advisor. And that person is someone that you have a good relationship with and you really trust them and um, appreciate their advice. And they're the person that you go to. So you say, oh, my friend Sally is my go-to person when I want to talk about my career. So do you have a go-to person when you have to go back to the drawing board? When I have to go back to the drawing board, I like to speak through the issue with my husband. He's my go-to person for bouncing ideas around and asking his opinion, kind of speaking my ideas out loud when I go back to the drawing board. What about you? Do you have a go-to person when you have to go back to the drawing board and rethink your ideas? Okay, back to basics. This one you can probably get a feel for it as you hear the examples. When the complex software kept crashing, the developers decided to go back to basics and rebuild the core functions. Okay, so the software is not working because it's very detailed and complex and difficult, and it's crashing. It keeps kind of breaking. And the developers say, okay, we're going to go back to basics and look at like all of the most important pieces and how we've structured this program. Okay, the second one, the customer complaints reduced greatly when the team went back to basics and focused on making sure phone calls were handled well. So there's many aspects of customer service and dealing with customer complaints, but actually communicating well with the customers is probably the most foundational one rather. Okay, I'm just going to show this comment because it's a really excellent one. When I have to go back to the drawing board, I like to speak through the issue with the experts in our company or with an expert in our company. That's a fantastic example. Yes. In a professional context, of course, you would go back to the drawing board and connect with the expert. So thank you for sharing that. That was really good. Okay, back to basics. Well, if something is basic, it's the most simple form. So if you go back to basics, it means you return to the fundamental aspects of something, the simplest form. So you simplify, you return to the fundamentals, or here's a good one, you start from scratch. So you are taking it back to the simplest aspect of it. So if we look at that example with the complex software, there's something about it that's not working. So let's take all the fancy extras away and let's just focus on, are the core things working? So let's get back to basics and see, can we make it work from the beginning? Can we make the simple parts of it work? So if your customer service department is not doing very well, can we go back to basics and just focus on one thing? Once that's working, then focus on the next, and then the next, and then the next. So it's very similar to go back to square one. And the other one, what was the other one? Back to the drawing board. It's very similar to that, but it has that meaning of going back to make it simple before you build it back up again. Okay, question for you. Have you ever found that going back to basics helped you solve a problem at work? Going back to basics at work. So what would that mean for you in your field? So for me in the field of education, going back to basics would mean really focusing on, what do I want the student to learn, or what do I want them to master? So if something's not working, I might go back to basics and think, okay, what is the core thing that I want them to learn? And maybe there's just one thing instead of lots of things. So that would be an example for me. I've found that going back to basics and focusing on one core thing I'd like people to learn is helpful. What about you? if you are listening live, have a go at putting your example in the comments. If you're listening on the replay, still go ahead and practice in the comments. It's really good to start using them immediately to help you consolidate your understanding of them. And if you're live and you can't get it typed before we move on, you're welcome to come back and do it later if you would like as well. Okay, wipe the slate clean. After the merger, so after the two companies joined, after the merger, the new CEO decided to wipe the slate clean and implement new policies across the company. They agreed to wipe the slate clean and put their disagreements behind them to work together effectively. If you put your disagreements behind you, then that means you decide to leave it in the past. So to put something behind you is to leave it in the past. Okay, wipe the slate clean means to start over with a fresh beginning, ignoring past mistakes or problems. So you might have a situation where you've always had arguments with someone and you say, do you know what? I'm so tired of talking about the past. Let's forget the past. Let's pretend, well, let's move on and let's say that never happened and we want to move forward. Let's wipe the slate clean. So I'm going to wipe the slate clean and not continually think about all the terrible past things. I'm going to put all my attention in now and the future, moving forward with a better relationship. So it means to start fresh, to begin anew, or to make a clean start. So we can wipe the slate clean for or with, so with someone or for something. Question, how do you balance wiping the slate clean with learning from past mistakes? Because it is a balancing act. You want to move forward into the future, but you don't want to not take that learning with you. So when considering when to wipe the slate clean, it is important to consider whether you have learned the lesson and whether the other person is also wanting to move forward with you. That's my opinion. One thing that if you were going to say let's forget the past, it's important that you don't repeat the past. That the other person also wants to move forward. Okay, so wipe the slate clean. Basically, let's forget the past. I'm just going to go back to that example here. After the merger, the new CEO decided to wipe the slate clean. So he decided to forget the past or move on from the past and implement new policies. So in a business setting, wiping the slate clean is about starting afresh with your own ideas often. Okay, moving on to, I think this is the last one, turn the page. After completing the challenging project, the team was ready to turn the page and start something new. We struggled a lot last quarter, but I know we are ready to turn the page. Okay, this is probably one where it's easier to understand. That turn the page means to move on from a past event or period and start a new chapter. So turning the page, very similar to the last one we just did, but you are, so we looked at wipe the slate clean. Wipe the slate clean, you are forgiving and forgetting. Turning the page, maybe it's not something that needs to be forgiven. It's not a conflict between people, but it's just, gosh, I really want a fresh start. I want to move on, start anew, have a new chapter. Okay, have you ever turned the page by switching industries or field? So have you ever started something completely new and turned the page and gone into a new industry or a new field? So 2013, gosh, that's a long time ago. 2013, I turned the page by starting to teach on Skype. That's a long time ago. There's a blast from the past. Okay, so that was an example of I started something new by switching within my field of education. Okay, when considering to wipe the slate clean, it is important to learn from the past and not repeat your mistakes. When considering whether to wipe the slate clean, it is important to learn from the past and not repeat your mistakes. I am so sorry I said I wasn't going to pull up every comment, but I'm just so excited when I see these really well-written examples, and I just wanted to show because that was an excellent one. Thank you for contributing that one. Okay, I'm not going to show them all. I promise. I'm going to stop myself, but that was a really good one. Okay, so if you want to practice with turn the page, that would be amazing. But we are going to go back to the extract and talk it through and just see if it makes a little bit more sense. Okay, Jessica had been unhappy at work for a while and was ready to wipe the slate clean. So she was ready to forget all of that horrible stuff and to forgive and to move forward. So to wipe the slate clean and find a new job. For a long time, she'd been eagerly researching, trying to understand her options. However, when her first application to a job was rejected, she felt like she was back to square one. So she's done all of these huge tasks of research and she thought like she'd move forward, but she hasn't because the research didn't help her. So she has to start all of those steps of research again. So it's just to start from the beginning. She said, I need to reassess my approach, she thought. So she went back to the drawing board. So she went back to thinking of creative ideas by revamping or redoing her resume and cover letter. She focused on getting back to basics. So she went to the most simplest things that are important and put all of her attention on the simple things. She didn't worry about what color the font should be or what whether she should, put lines underneath different sections or all the extra fancy things. She just focused on the most simple things. So she went back to basics by putting all her attention on ensuring her application really highlighted her skills and experiences. So the most basic thing is, does your resume show your skills? Her new application garnered or gathered for her, gave her, so it garnered an invitation to interview. Jessica was elated or very happy and felt she was finally about to turn the page, about to start new, turn the page on her bad luck. Okay, hopefully that made a little bit more sense as we went through it a second time. I'm going to do a very short quiz, but before I do, I'm just going to remind you that these slides are available. I will put a link in the description if you're watching on YouTube, and you can find it in my free resource library. I'm building out this free course bit by bit, so your patience is appreciated while I build it as I'm doing the lives. Okay, a quick quiz. Number 1. When the initial approach didn't work, the engineers had to go and redesign the entire system in a new way. They had to go wipe the slate clean, or put something to rest, or go back to the drawing board, or call the shots. What do you think? Number 1, A, B, C, or D? If you want to play along and put your answer in the comment section, that would be lovely. I really welcome you doing that. Okay, number 2. After the intense negotiations, the CEO knew it was time to something and focus on future opportunities. It was time to draw the line, cut something short, turn the page, call it a day. Okay, this one is actually a little bit of a tricky one because there's one answer that I was thinking of. Then after I realized there's actually 3 that could work, but in different contexts. Okay, so I see that you have, Fire Boys, you have said number 1, C, and you've said number 2, C. I would agree with you absolutely. And also, so number 1, C, when the initial approach didn't work, the engineers had to go back to the drawing board and redesign the entire system in a new way. Well done, you got it. And then number 2, absolutely, it's C, turn the page. After the intense negotiations, the CEO knew it was time to turn the page and focus on future opportunities. That's the one I was thinking of. I then realized that actually time to draw the line would mean it's time to put a boundary on some of the issues. So that would fit, but it would be a different meaning. And then call it a day, totally different meaning, but that would also fit. If the CEO knew it was time to stop working on this and focus on something else, that would also work. I hope that's not too confusing. 3 of them would work, but it would be different contexts and different meanings that they would work for. But you were totally correct. The one I was truly thinking of was turn the page. Okay, thank you everyone for joining live and on the replay. I so appreciate you being here. I hope you can make the next one. Take care. Bye everyone. Thanks.